This is Tanya Lynn with the Sistership Circle podcast. From spirituality, sexuality, and sisterhood to business, relationships, contribution, and creativity, the Sistership Circle podcast introduces a new model of feminine leadership where women get real and vulnerable about it all. Tune in for authentic advice that will empower you to be bold, beautiful, and brilliant as your true self. Welcome to the Sistership Circle podcast. I am Tanya Lynn, and I am so excited to introduce our amazing guest today. We are talking all about money, and we have Jacquette Timmons with me today, and she is a financial behaviorist committed to getting you to see that you don't manage money, you manage your choices around money. She's the author of Financial Intimacy, How to Create a Healthy Relationship with Your Money and Your Mate, and the creator of the Comfort Circle dinner series, where she hosts discussions about money, business, and life over food and wine. When she's not providing behavioral-based financial coaching, she's traveling the country for speaking engagements to talk about the intersection of emotions and money. Her work has been featured on Good Morning America, Oprah.com, CNN, HLN, Fox, Black Enterprise, NPR, Wall Street Journal, and Family Circle. So thank you so much, Jacquette, for coming on to talk about money with me today. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And as you know, this is one of my favorite topics. So.
Wow. And I love how you call yourself a financial behaviorist. So can we start there, and how did you even come up with that, and what is it exactly? So let's start there.
Sure. Well, as you read from my bio, my philosophy is all about the fact that you don't manage money as much as it is that you manage your choices around money. And for me, the whole idea of behavioral finance and behavioral economics came from my experience with the crash of 1987. I've only ever worked on Wall Street. I've been here since 1986, and I saw up close and personal in 87 just how differently people reacted. Some people freaked out and they wanted to jump out of a window. Other people were really calm, and I was totally fascinated by that. I wanted to know, why are these people responding so drastically different, or so differently, given that one thing happened? And what you can do is you can trace that back to their behavior, their choices, their expectations, whether or not they had a plan. How well do you deal with uncertainty? And when you unpack all of that, what you begin to realize is that while the numbers help to give us a story to talk about, it's really the story that we tell ourselves about the numbers that really is where we need to do the work. And so for me, as a financial behaviorist, it's working with my clients, whether it's singles, couples, entrepreneurs, or even in my speaking engagements, to help them manage their money through the lens of prioritizing your behavior over just crunching the numbers.
I love that. And so the first question that I come up with is, what are some of the behaviors that you see that aren't working? Can we start there?
Yeah, so, it's really interesting. One behavior is not wanting to make trade-offs. And so, for example, I have a current coaching client, and it's a couple. And as I'm reading through their responses to the questionnaire, they need to make some changes, but they're not ready to make the changes that they need to make. And what that really speaks to is the fact that we want what we want, how we want it, when we want it. But sometimes you have to, succumb to the fact that there are trade-offs that need to be made. And you can't always have everything at the same time to the, extent that you want it. And so that's one thing from a behavioral standpoint, is the willingness to see the trade-offs that you need to make and to do those trade-offs.
Oh, that's a big one.
It is a big one.
What other ones do you have to see?
Another big one, and this is probably a little bit more esoteric, but another big one would simply be not recognizing that you indeed have a relationship with money. It is not, yes, it's something that's external from you. It's tangible if it's money or your credit card. It's intangible if you're doing a transaction online. But just because it is something that is external from you, it doesn't mean that you don't have a relationship with it. And so I think the other thing from a behavioral standpoint is not recognizing that A, you have a relationship with money, and B, next to your parents and other family members, perhaps, it's one of the longest relationships you are ever going to have. And so with that, connected to that, I should say, is just like with any relationship, not recognizing that as time moves on, it evolves, it changes. The relationship that you have with money today is not the one that you had 5 years from now, and it won't be the one that you have 5 years forward. And we don't sometimes embrace that, let alone even recognize it. Or I should probably say recognize it, let alone even embrace it. So that would be another behavioral piece that I think people are not aware of, and that holds them back a bit.
And so when you are educating someone on that, and that might be a new thing for some of the people listening to this call right now, is how do we start to shift to have a relationship? What would that look like? What would a healthy relationship with money look like?
So I think the first thing would be to get to pen and paper and to actually sit down and write all of the different ways in which you use money, all of the different ways in which you are thinking about money, all of the different ways in which you either are making choices because of money in a good way, quote unquote, however you define good, and also quote unquote in a bad way, however you define bad. Sit for a moment and just think about those things, and then think about what are the biggest challenges that you have in your life right now, and what's the impact or the role that money is contributing to that. Maybe it's entirely about money, or maybe money is playing a role. So get pen to paper and just sit with yourself and figure out what is it saying to you by way of what you've written down. And some people might say that that's a little woo-woo and esoteric, but I think if you sit with it long enough, it will give you feedback for what you can do to take some concrete, grounded, practical action steps.
I love that. That is, yeah, just to start with simply writing and to start to develop that relationship.
We'll talk to it, right? I mean, you talk to anything else that you have a relationship with. There is some way in which you communicate. If it's a human being, you communicate verbally, you communicate in terms of body language. If it's a pet, you communicate because you give that pet affection and the pet gives you affection back. So I think you're always talking to money, and where money is always talking to you, and the way in which you talk to it is to pay more attention to what you were doing with it on a daily basis.
Yeah, to acknowledge that relationship.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
One of the things that we were talking about before the call was around the limited belief that you can't be spiritual and rich.
Right.
And I'm sure that there's a lot of other spiritual beliefs. And I love if we could actually go through a couple of these that are existing amongst many women and that I see a lot. So can we talk first about that one of the limited belief that you can't be spiritual and rich?
Yeah, I equate it with the whole idea also of the artist not being a true artist unless they are a starving artist. And so again, I would go back to sitting down with pen and paper and asking yourself, where did you get that belief? Where did that come from? Why do you embrace that? And to ask yourself those questions, not from a place of judgment, but truly from a place of curiosity. Because embedded in that conversation that you're having with yourself is the opportunity to move beyond that and to figure out how can you embrace money and all of the good things that you can do with money alongside whatever your spiritual practice is. Because the way that I look at it, an artist can't create their work if they're broke. And you as a spiritual person, you can't do whatever it is that you want to put out in the world if you're hungry. And whether that's you're hungry physically, if you're hungry emotionally, if you're hungry financially, you can't bring your best if you are not able to, have ends meet. And so this idea of being a martyr and, I'm broke, but I'm spiritual, to me, I think that's just a bunch of hogwash. And so I would love it if there were more examples of people that stood firmly in their spirituality, but also stood firmly in, and it is okay if I make money in the process. And not just make money, but that I thrive in the making of my money.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest things that I talk about with women leading women's circles, and that there is this belief that women's circles should be free. And I don't know how many times that this has come up on Facebook in conversation, and women getting so upset that we charge for our circles or that we charge for our trainings. And and part of that belief is stemming from this whole idea of being spiritual. And so if I'm spiritual, I shouldn't be taking money, and that's too materialistic. And the same thing with women's circles, like it's all about community and sisterhood, and you can't commoditize that. And yet it's really valuing the transformation that,
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And realizing that when you're asking somebody else not to put food on their table because you don't want to, because you adopt a particular mindset, like what is that really reinforcing? And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. What is that really reinforcing, and why? And would you ever show up for work, wherever it is that you work? Would you ever show up for work and just be like, nope, you don't have to pay me, but my mortgage is going to get paid, my rent is going to get paid? You would never do that. So why would you ask someone who has a business and what they're doing in their business is providing an opportunity for you to expand spiritually? Why would you ever expect that they should do that for free? I don't understand that. Churches don't operate for free. Churches operate under a tithing system. If you go to a mosque, I don't know precisely, but they don't exist without any sort of financial support. And so no spiritual practice that I know of that has a following and has physical space and all that other stuff, it does not exist without money playing a role in its existence. So the thought of asking people, or the thought of expecting that people should provide something to you for free, I think is really false, and it does more harm to us than it does good.
The one that I've been working with recently that I didn't really realize was there, but just had the awareness that something around like, if I'm rich, I won't be happy. And I remember, and this is just a very recent discovery for me as I've been doing some deeper work around money, where that came from, of seeing a lot of upset and seeing a lot of stress that money caused my dad. And so even though we had a lot of money, it wasn't necessarily that we were all the happiest people. And I didn't realize that that was really there for me. But I know that that's another limited belief is, rich people can't be happy. Rich people are jerks. A lot of those different ones around what we think that rich people are.
Yeah, and I think that the best way to tap into all of that, wherever you fall on the spectrum, is to just simply ask yourself very gently, well, why do I believe that? And once you write down an answer, well, why do I believe that? Until you get to the crux of it. And it's almost like following the 5 whys. Ask yourself that 5 times, and that will help you to get to the crux of, why have you embraced this? And then it helps you to decide, is this working for me? And if it is, cool. And if it's not, then what am I willing to do to change? And it only has to be one small step, but what are you willing to do to change it? And, for me, I think we're always working on it. You mentioned when you were doing the intro about the dinners that I host. And I have been having a total ball with them. And I'm going to be raising the price in the new year for that. And part of it was because this year was the first year. So, I did a price, and it was really, it doesn't even necessarily break even given the venue that I'm using for this. And I realized from having conversations with a few friends that I had to get to the point where I was like, okay, I'm raising the price, and that means that some people don't come, and I have to be okay with that. And sometimes that's the conversation that we have to have with ourselves. You get to choose. You get to choose your clients. You get to choose who, you don't necessarily get to choose who say yes, but you get to choose to not price your point only to the people that you think will say yes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's huge.
It's totally huge.
That goes back to the choices, right? It's
right.
For us to really get that we have a choice.
Absolutely.
So sometimes we forget that we have a choice.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful when you look at it and you realize that subtle of a shift could have such a significant impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that was in your bio is the intersection between emotions and money.
Uh-huh.
And, that's kind of, I feel like we're kind of going there naturally in this conversation about, that can bring up a lot of emotions for people when they're having to raise their prices. So can you speak a little bit about what you teach around emotions and money?
Yeah. So what the example that you just mirrored back to me is one. But I think I would like to talk about it by way of an example. Let's say that we give two of your listeners $1, and we ask them to come back in 30 days and tell us what did they do with that $1. One person might come back and say, I saved it, and now I have $2. They might come back and say, I invested it, and now I have $20. The other person might come back and say, girl, I spent that. There's not a dime left. Or they might say, I didn't do anything with it. I still have that same dollar. It's in my purse. It's in my wallet. It's in my pocket. Any of those choices are viable choices. None of them are good. None of them are bad. As equally, they both could have made the same choices, meaning they both could have saved a little, they both could have spent some, they both could have invested, given some away, used it in other ways, but they did the examples that I just laid out to you. And why? They did that because of their circumstances, because of their beliefs, because of their expectations, because of their fears, because of their goals and their aspirations. And that is regardless of whether or not that example was $1 or it's $100 or $1,000 or $100,000. So when we talk about emotions, the emotions are all of those invisible things that you can't see that play out in the physical way in which you interact with your money, in which you decide, I'm going to take this credit card, this debit card, I'm going to take this $1, I'm going to take this coin, I'm going to go onto this particular website. It's all of the stuff that you can't see, but that has a physical manifestation and a physical impact on how you are experiencing what you are doing with your money in that moment, how you are experiencing what you are thinking about money in that moment, whether you are thinking this is going to help me move forward or whether you're pissed off at it because it's not doing what you want it to do. So the emotions is tapping into all of the invisible things, but recognizing that those invisible things have a physical and very tangible manifestation.
Thank you for that. When you mentioned circumstances, what immediately came up for me is when we are then reacting to those circumstances and we don't even realize that that's what's holding us back, as you're just saying. And then we get kind of caught in, well, I don't have the money for that. And we continue to make the same choices that keep putting us in that same place. And I see this a lot of times with, women who perhaps want to start a business and they keep saying, well, I don't have the money to get started. I want to do this training, but I don't have the money to do this. What would you say for that?
Well, you very well may not have the money to do it. I mean, that's a reality. Like, don't try to, don't try to make what is real unreal by thinking it differently. Because if you don't have money in the bank, you don't have money in the bank. And that's a fact. But that's all that it is, right? It's just a fact. So then that means, well, what do I need to do to get the money? Which then means you need to get really clear about how much money do you need. So often people will come to me and they'll say, I need to save. Okay, well, how much do you need to save? Or, people are coming to you and saying, I want to start a business. Okay, well, have you run the numbers to figure out what do you need to get started? What are you going to need in order for this to be a sustainable business so that it's actually helping you? Like, if you don't run the numbers, then you don't have a clue of what do you need to do differently with what you have so that you can get the money that you do need. And I think that that's the key. Like, whenever we're making a goal, whether it's a financial goal or any other goal, it's not so much about what it is that you want at a future point. It is about what are the choices that you need to make right today that are going to help you to get there. And you can only make the choices with what you have right now. So if you need $10, but you have $1, you need to think about, well, what do I need to do differently with this $1 that I haven't been doing in the past in order for me to have what I want in the future? So it is not lying to yourself about where you are, but looking at that through the prism of, well, if this is what I have, then what do I need to do differently in order to get to where I want to be? And to me, that's actually a more empowering position from which to operate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very much rooted in reality. And you're looking at the numbers, and because most of the time, people don't even know what they're spending.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And we actually just had this come up in our relationship where we made more money, but we have the exact same amount of debt.
Mm-hmm.
And we sat down and we're like, okay, if we really truly want to get rid of this debt, we need to start being much more diligent about looking at the numbers and looking at where are we spending and creating a budget. And it was amazing what happened when we did that. First of all, the first thing that came up was just how hard that was. Stay committed to it.
Right, exactly.
It was huge just to notice how much we'd want to let each other off the hook. Right? Like, can I buy this? I'd really, and we're like, no, and the other person would have to be like, no, we're committed here.
Right.
But and just to get clear on, how much money is that we actually need to tackle, and what do we need to put away each month, and building that into the budget. And it's just been a very fascinating process because we got clear on what those numbers were just for this thing. So
exactly
thank you for that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Wow. I can't believe we're up on time already. So you have a book, which I just want you to briefly mention about the book, Financial Intimacy, How to Create a Healthy Relationship with Your Money and Your Mates. So does that have to do with money and relationship? Because I know that's a huge problem in relationships.
Yes, it does. And it is a book that is for everybody, and that was intentional, that it be something that, all sorts of relationship statuses can benefit from. But it looks at the intersection of love and money through what I like to say a social critic or a cultural critic's lens, in terms of what has happened over the last 40 years, politically, economically, socially, and in terms of financial, family dynamics, I should say. And how do those things impact who we are? How do we show up in relationships? And what do we expect? I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear all of the noise out there. Okay. And what do we expect from relationships, and how two people more than likely are going to come together and have the opposite expectation, have the opposite experiences, And how do you merge that together? How do you merge that together in a healthy way? How do you take your money story, if you will, with another person's money story and create intentionally a very new money story? So that's what it's really all about.
Wow, awesome. And we'll have the link to that book in the
Oh,
show notes.
awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Before we wrap up, is there any gift that you like to give our audience today?
Yes, that'd be fantastic. So I always recommend the financial wheel exercise, which is obviously a free exercise. And I recommend it because it takes a look at very broadly the 4 things that anybody can do with their money. Save it, spend it, invest it, and earn it. But it asks some very poignant questions in each of those different areas with the intent of getting you to see the degree to which you live by default, which is how many of us have been conditioned to live, versus living our lives by design, which is what the financial wheel is inviting people to do. So I would encourage people to download that. The other thing that I would encourage people to do is to take a look at their most recent financial statement. And from that statement, do what I call the roll call exercise and go through all of your expenses, your debits and your withdrawals. And if it was a purchase that you regretted, label it R. If it was a purchase that was mandatory, label that M. And if it was a purchase that made you happy, label that H. And then tally up and see how many H's do you have, how many R's do you have, how many M's do you have. And that will be really revelatory in terms of you really understanding more about not only what do you have, but what do you tend to do with what you have and why.
Wow, powerful, just so insightful, and to bringing such conscious awareness to your relationship with money. I love it.
Thanks.
So much, Jacquette, for joining me today and sharing all of your wisdom. And again, you'll find links to some of those resources in the show notes of this show. And thank you. We'll see you next time on Sistership.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.